Hi everyone. In this tutorial, we will see what is GraphQL and how to integrate GraphQL with ServiceNow. So this is basically a Paris feature. GraphQL stands for the query language for APIs, and it is a runtime for fulfilling the queries based on the existing data. What I mean by existing data is we will get all the data with one API call, and based on that existing data we will manipulate the queries. We'll see that in a demo in very soon. So if we go back to the history, GraphQL is uh, internally developed by Facebook, and they were using this for mobile applications for low-end network devices. And slowly the focus moved from uh, allowing the developers, allowing the client side to see get the data what exactly they need. So so what is GraphQL is used for? So it is basically used to load the data from server to a client. And and if we talk about the advantages and of the GraphQL, the main advantage of GraphQL is to able to send queries specifying only the information you need and get exactly that. So there are some disadvantages are also there. We'll talk about that in soon. So yeah, so as discussed, the GraphQL is a query language for APIs and a runtime for fulfilling queries with the existing data. So let us take an example with comparison of GraphQL with REST API. For example, in REST API, we will have multiple endpoints. For example, in case uh, we, if we want to know the list of books, we need to get authors first, and when we use the authors, we'll get all the list of authors. Here we can see that ID, name, age, state, and lot of other fields will come with that endpoint. And so to know the books are written by this author, again we need to make a server call. That is another endpoint. So we'll send the author ID over there, and we will fetch all the books with the same author ID. So here the author ID will be the reference. So again, if there is another author, we need to send the another author and get the list of books. So if you look into this, we are having multiple server calls in the REST API. So if we compare the same example in GraphQL, so we will be having only one server call. So for example, if you see over here, so this is how the GraphQL query looks like. So this is called schema definition language. So we will this is a syntax, like we need to write query and authors, and you can see the author name and books and the book name. So whereas as we discussed, like there is only one endpoint, so that is GraphQL, which is common for any instance. So if we will send a, as soon as we send this query, it will return all the data as in needed. So if you look into over here, it is not providing any additional information. Like on REST API, we are seeing the author age, author address, everything, etc. Right? So whereas in GraphQL, as we have defined the query to get only the author name and book's name, so we are getting only that specific data, no other uh, additional data we are pulling. So hence This will improve the performance of our page. So this is how the GraphQL works. So if we quickly compare the GraphQL with REST API, so this is how it looks. So architecture, GraphQL is basically a client driven because we are making one server call and get all the data, and based on that data we are querying and manipulating. So in the REST API we have multiple server calls. So it is organized in terms of schema and type system. So this is called SDL in GraphQL, so schema definition language, and also type system. So in REST point we will say it as an endpoints. We can do the same operation, but the naming conventions are different. GraphQL will say it as a query, mutation, subscription. On the REST we will say like CRUD. Data fetching is a single API call, so fixed with multiple API calls. So community is still growing for GraphQL, and REST is already huge. So if we talk about the performance, GraphQL is very fast, and REST, as we are having multiple calls, then it may little bit of slow when we compare with the GraphQL. So development speed is very fast in GraphQL. So whereas on REST API it will be slow. So let's see a quick demo on this, how to set up a GraphQL on ServiceNow. So if you look into the screen, there are these 3 steps to configure the GraphQL API. First thing, we'll go to the instance. Yeah. So GraphQL is out of the box installed on any instance. We don't need to install any additional plugin for that. So this is my new personal instance. So if I search for GraphQL over here, so we can see the modules over here. So under the system web services, we have the GraphQL API. So first we need to create the GraphQL API from here. So the step 1 is to create the GraphQL API. Step 2, we need to create a scripted resolvers, and then we need to map the scripted resolvers with mapping. So we'll see that in short. So now I'll create the GraphQL API. So in this demo we will see only the querying part. So mutation we are not going to touch today. So I'm going to delete this. Yeah. So this is the schema definition language which I was talking about. So for GraphQL API, we need to give if you look into the fields overall, so we have the security enablement, for example, requires authentication for this API or not. And also if you want to enforce additional ACLs, we can do that. So right now for this demo, I'm disabling this and let the simple authentication be there. And so this is on the GraphQL, we will be having the application namespace. This application namespace is common for one instance. So if, as this is my personal instance, for all the different types of APIs within the GraphQL, I will have the single namespace, which is this one. So let's create the GraphQL by giving a short name. We'll call it as incident data. So schema namespace is automatically getting created. So this should be unique. Namespace should be unique. So if I try to create the same namespace with one more GraphQL API, it will not allow. So we'll see that. And first of all, I'll save this. Yeah. So if I try to insert and stay, it says like namespace is already exists. See this, right? So this should be unique. So now we'll do an example. So if I go to the incidents, yeah. So on incidents, we will see these incidents. So incidents by caller ID, we'll set up that API and see how the data will return. So in this case, I'll create a new method over here. So we'll call that method as get incident by caller ID, and it will have one parameter as we discussed. So we need to send the caller ID, and we need to define one more type system for this one. So which is, we can say as incident data. So this is called a one more new type system we need to do. And so we will create one more type system over here like this, and what it will contain, we can write all those fields over here. For example, number, and so we can say it as a string, and then we can say like short description. So short description, and it is also a string. So this is how we configure the schema definition language. So this is more of a GraphQL knowledge. I am not that aware of this, but this is a basic example we are taking right now. So over here, in order to avoid the null records or undefined records, there is a syntax to avoid that. So if I write id not exclamatory mark, then it will avoid all the uh, undefined records or null records, we can say. So now the API is ready. So let's save this. Let me go back to the GraphQL. So this is the one which we have created. I think everything is gone. Let me quickly do that again. Get incident by caller ID and caller ID not null, and define one more type system which is incident data. So this incident data will have, so we need to write type, have a number of that incident, and the data type is string, and the short description is also a string. Now let's save this. Now we have created the API. Second thing, we need to create the GraphQL Scripted Resolver. So when we send the parameter over there, so we need to call the server and get the data, right? So this is that place. So here I'll say like where, or I can just query all the incidents and David Manuel is the. So I'll copy the query. So this is our query. So we don't require all of this. So incident and caller ID is dynamic. So we need to say environment env dot get arguments dot. So what's the variable name that we have defined on the method that we need to give? So in our case, this is caller ID. Let's give a small ID. So dot caller ID, and we don't require order by. So query and return. Required this all. Return incident. So yeah, this is the simple example of how the resolver will look like. So we need to uh, get the parameters using the environment resolver environment variable, and then we can query and get all the data. So we can give we have to give a name for this resolver. So let's give that as incident by caller ID. So once this is done, we just need to save this. Yeah. So if we go back to our steps, first thing, we have created the GraphQL API and we have used the schema over there. And second thing, we have created the GraphQL Scripted Resolver. If we send the caller ID, it will return all the records for that particular caller ID. And third one is we need to map this resolver. So if I go back to the API again, so this is our API. So now if I refresh this, we will have that resolver as well. Now let's create the resolver mapping. So this is the one. So I'll go ahead and click on new, and so we need to define over here. So it will by default show all the type systems which are in the same namespace. So we need to select this one. So the query has that method, right, a parameter, right? So we'll say the query, and then the resolver is incident by caller ID, which we have created. So over here, these are common like the schema, and let's save this. So right now the GraphQL setup is done. So all these three setup is done. Now to test this, like how it works, how the data will retrieve, we can use any third-party tool to see how the data is coming with the API. So let's go back to the any third-party tool. So in our case, I'm using the Postman. So if you are not aware of Postman, just don't worry. So I'll just quickly walk you through how to create new one. So after installing the Postman, you just need to sign in, and once you sign in, you will have empty over here. Then you can create your own new workspace if required. And in this case, I have already created workspace, but for demo, I'll create one more new workspace. I'll say GraphQL demo and create workspace. And after creating workspace, you can create the collection. So I can say GraphQL collection or whatever. So after creating a collection, so here comes the API. So we need to say request, and the request type is post over here, and the URL. So what will be the endpoint for GraphQL is very simple. So we just need to give the URL, and we need to say GraphQL. That's it. Isn't that simple? Yeah. So coming to authorization, as we said, like the basic auth, right? So we can set the authorization. So we can say like basic auth. I'm going to use same my user credentials for system admin credentials over here, which is admin and password. So now this is done. After doing this, we need to go to the body. If you look into here, we have this GraphQL. So we need to select that GraphQL, and then we need to write the query. If you remember, we have this query right on GraphQL. So yeah, so this is how the data will come, right? So sorry, not this one. Yeah, so this is the query that we are going to write now. So we need to say query and the method name and what data to pick. So in our case, so this is the syntax, like what we need to use. First, we need to start with open. This means the query starts from here. And now we need to define what is the application namespace. So if you remember, over on the API, we have this application namespace. So we need to use that. And go back to the Postman. And again, brackets open and close. Now we need to define what is the schema namespace. So first thing is application namespace. Second thing is schema namespace. So this application namespace will be unique across all the across one instance, and schema namespace will differ from API to API. So let's go and get that method. Yeah, now we need to call the method. So in our case, what is the method we have given? If we go back to the port API, so this is our API. So we set the method name as getIncidentsByCallerID. So we can paste that, and here we need to send the caller ID dynamically. For example, caller. So we'll say the caller ID, and what's the data we need to send that as a string, and brackets open and close. So for the demo purpose, I'll send the same user David minor sysID. Let's take it. So this is the user sysID. Copy and paste. So now what we need to do is, once what this will return a lot of data, right? So in as we configured our API, so it will return the short description and also the number. So let's try to run this and see what is it returning. Okay, looks like some issue is there. So let me go back to, I think we need to define what to print over here. So let's say number. Yeah, I paused a video for a second to identify the issue. So the issue is the syntax is correct. We are calling wrong URL. So the correct format of this is, so we need to give the instance name and then /API /now/GraphQL. So we forgot this one. So let's try to add that on the endpoint. And now when I run this, yeah, you see this, right? All the data is coming fine. So the number is holding the display value and the value. So we can play around with this. For example, we also added the short description field, right? So we can include that, but like just like this, short description and send. So you can see the response like this: a number and short description, display value, and also the value. So this is how it renders the data. So you can define. So if you want to restructure the data, for example, display value and values there, right? So let's go back to the API. In this case, this is our API, right? So now I wanted to define one more over here. So let's call it as a displayable string. We can create one more type system and we can say the value is an or label, can give our own. So we can say the value is string and the label is also string over here. So now when you do like this, what happens is we need to call one more method and then we can fetch the data. So I'll save the changes over here. Now now the shop description contains two things, so we can just print the label or print the value. So let's test the value. Yeah, you see this, right? So we can play around how exactly we want it. So this is the main advantages of like as getting the fields only that are required. So this is more of a demo on ServiceNow GraphQL. So if we talk about the disadvantages on GraphQL a little bit, the one thing is there are no versionings available as of now. So every time if you want to add enhancements to it, again you need to change the main query structure. So whereas in REST API you can maintain the versions, and version 1 will have a set of fields and version 2 will have set of fields. But whereas on the GraphQL, as it is a single endpoint, we always make sure to have the query in a proper structure so that uh, versionings are not possible, right? So we need to be take care of we need to be cautious on that place. So that's the main disadvantages as of now that people see on the GraphQL. Other than this, the performance is like rapid fast. So that's it for the today's tutorial. If you have any questions, please feel free to mention in the comments below, and hit the like button if you like this video, and don't forget to subscribe the channel for more videos. Thank you for watching. Bye.